If you think this lick is cool but too difficult, then I'm talking to you. I believe that learning this lick is no more difficult than learning the first few chords on the guitar when you were starting out. After all, that was completely alien to you as well. So yes, you can easily learn this lick. How can I make such a promise? If you follow the super easy method that I'll show to you in this video, you will almost instantly make progress. But you need to promise one thing to yourself, that you don't skip ahead any of the parts trying to learn the complete thing. In fact, that is the single most common reason that people give up, trying to grasp too much and then finally getting overwhelmed, saying to themselves stuff like, "Man, this lick sucked anyway, I'll stick to my old pentatonic chops." Not that there's anything wrong with pentatonic chops, I love those. So before we put together the complete lick, we will divide it into a few different chunks that makes it much easier to accelerate. Now let's dive into the first part that fortunately sounds killer by itself. What we're gonna work with as the first step is just this little simple thing here, just a little nugget of the complete sweep picking pattern. So we're only gonna focus on 3 strings in this first part. And let's just take it from the top, and then we'll go a little deeper into detail with what exactly it is we want from this lesson, and also how to practice it. But let me just give you the first few notes that we're gonna play here. The first thing I do is I position my little finger on the 16th fret on the high E string, which sounds like this. And then I do a bit of a little stretch here between my little finger and my index finger here. My index finger goes all the way down to the 12th fret. And if you notice how I actually position my index finger in such a way so it actually has contact with 2 different strings. In this case, it's the high E string and the B string. And the reason that we do this is because we want the index finger to be able to play 2 individual notes, and this requires a very specific technique, and I call it the rolling technique. You might have heard it under different names, but the name is not important. What's important is that we learn this technique and we master this technique, because if we want to play sweep picking on the guitar, hearing each individual note, it's extremely crucial that we actually are able to use this technique. If you notice the way that I play it, notice my index finger, how it works between the strings. That's the reason that I call it rolling, is because I feel that it's a rolling motion that my index finger is doing. But combined with that, and that's what can maybe feel a little overwhelming, and that's the reason that I want to just chunk everything and into little nuggets that are much easier to work with. But notice that it's a combination of several techniques. It's actually a combination of a pull-off here from the little finger, which is that I actually start. How I do this is actually I start with a picking stroke. And you can, since we are working with a sweep picking pattern, what I do personally is I started with an upstroke, because it just makes more sense, because right after that pull off I move into a long row of upstrokes which makes up the technique sweep picking. So I started with an upstroke, and then immediately, because I want to make sure that each note are equally long, I roll into the B string on the 12th fret as well, obviously, because it's not really any other solutions or any other possibilities here, but you can see. So after I've done the picking stroke like so, and immediately after the picking stroke I pull my little finger off, and then we are moving into that rolling motion, and that is obviously another picking stroke, that like so. And again here we already face another challenge, because since we are playing 2 notes on the high E string, but one of the notes are a pull off, it feels like sort of like the picking is stalling before it can move into the next string, which in this case is the B string. This is the reason that we actually have to adjust our picking motion, our picking work to the fretting hand. So until now we have the upstroke, we have a pull-off, and we have a rolling motion of the index finger. So these three things are the first things that you gotta work on. And you can try to experiment with adding a little bit of a distortion like I've done, just to see how it sounds, because the reason that I do the rolling is not just because I think it looks cool. It's actually to avoid both strings ringing at the same time. You can hear this actually sounds like a chord ringing, like a power chord or something like that, like a power chord, and we want to avoid that at any cost. So this is the reason that I do this little rolling motion. So once I've played I've done the pull-off as we discussed before, and I'm ready to move into the B string, what happens is that when my index finger do this rolling motion, the string, the high E string, stops from touching the fret, and the fret is actually what makes the sound. So as soon as the string does not touch the fret, we'll get that open string sound. But the cool thing about the rolling motion is actually that it not only makes the string let go of the fret, but it still has contact with the string. And what this results in is a muted string. And ultimately we'll end up have three individual notes like this. In this first step I just want to add one more note, that is the 13th fret on the G string. And I use my long finger because it doesn't really make sense to use any other finger than the long finger in this, because in general you want to make things as easy as possible. So now we have 16 on the high E string with the upstroke as we discussed before, we have the pull off, we have the rolling of the finger, the index finger in this case, and we finally have the long finger on the 13th fret on the G string. I'm sure you've noticed that I move back and forth all the time in this. And I just want to move a little closer into that and discuss that in detail, because it takes a little extra focus on the picking. As we talked about before, I play an upstroke here on the 16th fret with my little finger and then pull off to that crazy rolling motion here with my index finger. And once I reach the G string, you can see I do that with all upstrokes. So I play 3 upstrokes. So in order to be able to move back again to the B string, so we can play the sweep picking pattern back and forth like this, you might notice that I actually, after playing that 3rd upstroke, I move down again on the B string, and then I do the rolling motion again of my index finger. So we do the complete opposite as we did before with the rolling motion in order to play the ascending part of the sweep picking pattern as well. So I play up, pull off, up, up, and then down, down, and then we start all over again. You gotta get this motion going. And also, as we discussed before, one of the small challenges, but definitely very learnable, is that we have to adjust the pick here when we play on the high E string. When we ascend the sweep picking pattern, you can see I actually have 2 picking strokes on the high E string, because I play a down on the 12th fret and then an up on the 16th fret. But then we still have to play another note, the pull off from 16 to 12, and in this time the pick looks like it's stalling when I'm playing really slow. But if you notice, when I accelerate the tempo a little bit, it looks like the hand is moving, is in motion all the time, and that's because it is. Try to keep a focus on, once you got the notes down, of course, here in the fretting hand, but try to keep a little bit of your focus on moving your picking hand, moving it in a constant motion without stopping. You can see, even though I played extremely slow, I do take the pace down here on the when I'm in the space between the high E string and the B string, but it is in constant motion actually. Before we move into this next part of it, I want to ask you, did you spend time on the first part, making sure that you are actually able to play the first part, getting all the individual notes? The most important thing is that you got the first part working, so that you already have some results that we can now build on. If you didn't finish the first part of the video, I want you to go back and keep working on the first part, not necessarily watching the video, but making sure that you got all the right notes and all the tips on the technique, so that you get that first thing down before you move into this, where we actually connect the dots to the complete sweep picking pattern. Where we left off was this part. But now we want to connect it to the rest of the sweep picking pattern, which goes like this. So actually, because we played a 3-string pattern, we're gonna add the rest of our 6 strings. And remember, I have a 7-string guitar here, so don't be alarmed by that. So when I'm down here, this is actually your lowest string if you're playing a 6-string. If we just take it from the top here again, 16 and 12 on the high E string, rolling down to 12 on the B string, and then 13 on the G string. I'm just gonna skip that part pretty quickly because I'm assuming that you know the first part by now. What happens now is that we're gonna play the rolling technique again, but with a different finger. So instead of using the index finger for rolling, we're gonna use the ring finger for rolling this time. First I want to show you just the notes that we're gonna play. So after playing with an upstroke on the G string, 13th fret, you move into the D string with the ring finger, and take note here that I'm, again, just like I did with the index finger, I'm positioning my ring finger so that I can easily roll over 2 strings, because if I positioned it like this, I would not be able to reach the A string, and then in the middle of everything I would probably pitch the note because I had to, you know, press the string up in order to be able to reach the A string. So we actually want to practice this in a tempo that allows us to be able to adjust the ring finger in such a way that we can reach both the D and the A string. So once we're here on the D string, 14th fret, I roll it down to the 14th fret on the A string. And then we continue into the low E string, and this time with the little finger. Here on the 16th fret, and this is obviously all upstrokes. And then I play a downstroke on the 12th fret. And then, much like we did here on the high E string, whenever we were returning to the high E string from the B string, we had 3 notes, but only 2 picking strokes. So, and that happens exactly the same thing here on the low E string. Because once we reach the low E string, if we want to continue the sweep picking pattern, we're gonna move back here to the G sharp 16th fret here. The only difference between the high E string and the low E string in regards to what we just talked about is that instead of a pull off from the G sharp to the high E here, we're gonna play after the downstroke here on the low E string 12th fret. I play a hammer-on back here to the 16th fret, and then we move into the A string 14th fret with the ring finger again. And actually the ascending part is a little easier in the way that now I don't have to pay attention to positioning it in such a way so that it can reach 2 strings, because that actually happens naturally here, because since I'm just gonna play 14th fret here on the A string, I would still be able to roll it down to the D string. So that's the good news. When we're on the high E string, that extra note, because it comes to 3 notes from E to the G sharp and then pull off again. So, and we only have 2 picking strokes. And that extra note, that final note is on the high E string is a pull off, and the exact opposite on the low E string, which is then a hammer on. Like that. Notice that when I come back and turn it around, the picking stroke changes a little bit, because if I wanted to start here with an upstroke, many people like to start with a downstroke and then do a pull off. It doesn't really matter that much. But anyway, if I start with an upstroke just to make it as similar as the complete motion of the pick, then I would start with an upstroke. Up, pull off, up, up, and then up, 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 down, hammer on, down, 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 and then up again. And then we can continue that pulling off again. Before we move in and add the final thing, which is a completely new technique, and in this case we are going to talk about tapping. The tapping technique in itself is of course nothing new to the contemporary guitar player, but the combination of sweep picking and tapping is certainly not new, but it's definitely a way more advanced technique than tapping in itself. But combining sweep picking and tapping is something that really requires a lot of focus and a lot of determination. We are tapping the 23rd fret. If you don't have 24 frets, or 23 for that matter, you can tap the 21st or the 19th fret. And if we're talking about theory, this is the major 7th. You could actually also tap the 22nd, which would then be the lowered 7th, then the 6th here on the 21st, and then we have on the 19th fret we have the 5th. And you don't really need to know this theory unless you are adding it to a specific scale, but in the lick itself it's not important. But you can play around with these 4 different notes, the 23rd, 22nd, 21st, and then the 19th fret. Of course it will bring a different sound, but if we're not talking about playing the lick in conjunction with anything else, these notes will all work. I'm gonna assume that you now have a lot of experience with the sweep picking pattern itself. If you don't feel comfortable and if you're not completely sure of every note in the sweep picking pattern, I'm gonna ask you to stop the lesson and then work on the sweep picking pattern until you feel really comfortable with it, because it makes no sense to add a new element unless you feel really confident with the sweep picking pattern in itself. Because as I talked about in the introduction to this video, the most important thing is that you divide the lick up into individual patterns that are easily obtainable in order to see fast progress. So if we just take it here from the low E string, I play 12 with my index finger and then 16 with my little finger. And then again I use that ring finger to roll over the A and D string on the 14th fret. So, and then with the long finger I use that for the 13th fret. And then the index finger is doing that rolling motion as well as the ring finger did on the A and D. When we add the tap, we do things a little bit different. Instead of playing an upstroke here on the 16th fret with the little finger, I hammer that note on here and then I add the tap. Because if I also played the picking stroke on that one, I would be really in a hurry to add that note. In this lesson we want to keep each note equally long. And as soon as I have tapped that note, the 23rd fret, I pull that note off again and then pull the rest of the notes off, which in this case is 16 to 12, and then play the rest of the sweep picking pattern. So the interesting thing also about this is that as soon as you've done the tab here and you pulled off, then the pick is not involved before we move into the B string. So I do my pull off and then roll my index finger down here, and then I start the picking motion again. One final thing I just want to say, if you want to go more into detail with the tapping, you could also play the first part of the lesson, which was only over the 3 strings, like this one. And you could actually add the tapping to that part as well. Sounds pretty sweet as well, I think. This is a really cool little drill. Hammer my finger, the tapping finger, in on whatever note you want to tap. And after I've done that, there's 2 possibilities. One thing is you can sort of pull up, which is what I do, to get that pull off like if you did it with the fretting hand instead. It's actually the same technique, or you could do it down. I actually see some people do it down instead. Just make sure that you don't pull the string over the frets.